Hello everyone. Hi conference. I am Eliza. I am head of the policy unit for the Creative Industries Policy and Evidence Centre, which is led by Nesta, which is my home organisation. And I am a youngish white woman with brown hair pulled back into a kind of bun and a very boring long-sleeved white t-shirt. I wanted to mention at this point for this session, any participants who want to can access a live transcription via a stream text link, which will be shared in the chat. So on to the session. In this session, we are going to be exploring questions of creative places and what we're calling new localism. As many of you know, the last few years have seen a renewed emphasis on questions of locality and placemaking, both in Westminster with the Levelling Up agenda, which is supposed to have a white paper in the spring, but also at national and at more local levels. We know that COVID has put an unprecedented amount of pressure on regional resources, but has also demonstrated how important local communities are to the creative and cultural sectors, and vice versa, how absolutely essential creative and cultural industries are to local communities. And if you'll forgive me a quick plug, this is something that a recent piece of Creative Industries Policy and Evidence Centre, or PEC, research has demonstrated, that's called Creative Radar 2. And I'll pop links in the chat later. So today we're going to be hearing from a pretty amazing raft of experts about how place-based strategies can help to support the cultural sector, as well as how evidence can help to support the development of those strategies. This panel follows on from some work that the PEC's been doing as part of the COVID-19 project with the CCV. And in this, we asked our industry champions, so a group of almost 100 people from across the sector, kind of a group within that, how the creative industries and the cultural sector particularly can play a part in placemaking post-pandemic. And I'm going to pop a link to that as well for you to read after this session. But without further ado, I want to introduce our illustrious panel. Each is going to speak for 5 minutes, giving their unique perspective on creative places and whether we have reached what we might call a new approach to localism. You're going to hear them touch on questions of devolution. They'll be talking about supporting communities to speak for themselves and questioning how culture can operate within really small localities. We want to, in this panel, bridge the gap between some huge, almost philosophical questions about how we change kind of growth in our regions. What does levelling up mean? But also to stay really practical. And I think me and the panel have spoken a little bit, and we all understand that we can't wait to take action on any of this, and that real lives and livelihoods are at stake. So we'll leave loads of time for questions. Please put thoughts and questions into the Q&A section of the panel, and I'll ask them once the questions are finished. You can also raise your hand and come to the floor and be invited on stage, handed the microphone, whatever the description is in this online world, to ask your question directly. And so I look forward to hearing from some pretty knowledgeable people I know are in the audience later on. But first of all, I'd like to invite Pam Johnson to speak from Leeds City Council. So over to Pam.
Thank you, Eliza. Hello, everyone. So my name is Pam Johnson. I'm Head of Culture Programmes at Leeds City Council. I am a Black woman with dark hair pulled back. I'm wearing glasses and a high neck black top, the type that you traditionally see in theatre, I guess. I started just really thinking about this session with the question itself, and actually really asking about really what the title means. And also, given what we've all been through over the last 5 years, it's always a good time, the last 2 years, it's always a good time to kind of really reflect on who we are and where we are. So I started by asking, what is a creative place? And in particularly, what does new localism mean? So I'm going to just maybe focus my 5 minutes on talking about our culture strategy and really what that's doing really within the city of Leeds. Let me open by just explaining or introducing Leeds. Leeds is the third largest city in the UK by population. Its population is fast approaching 800,000 people. 19% are of minority ethnic background. 12.6% were born outside of the UK. There are 169 different nationalities in the city and 170 different languages spoken. 2.7% of the residents were also born in another EU country. It is a rich and diverse city, with that diversity really broadly spread across the city rather than concentrated in key areas. Are we a creative city? Yes, we are a creative city. It's Leeds is home to major cultural organisations. Channel 4 established its HQ here in 2019, and subsequently other broadcasters have followed suit and have established centres here. But mostly Leeds is home to a huge range of small and medium creative enterprises and a huge and growing body of independent freelance practitioners, many of them graduates from one of our 6 universities in the city. I should also say that actually I was born here, and in 54 years of life, I've left the city numerous times for work and for study. And I returned here in 2019 to a much richer and much strange place. And now I've decided, certainly after the last 2 years, that I'm just going to stop leaving. So my 5 minutes, I want to focus on our culture strategy. And if we kind of maybe think about our culture strategy as our local strategy, one of the questions that we're asking ourselves is how does the local and the hyperlocal connect with and meet new emerging national policy? I've got some concerns really around some of that, and levelling up is one of them. So we have our culture strategy, which takes us to 2030. And one of the milestones of our culture strategy is Leeds 2023, our year of culture. I'll come back to that very briefly later. One of the most powerful things about our culture strategy is how it was made. Everyone was invited to shape the city's cultural ambitions: people, communities, businesses, schools, our creative sector and cross-council departments. At its heart, it recognises that place making or place shaping is people. It's people that make place, not policy, not government, not even local government. It's people. And under the strategy, our definition of culture talks not just to what we do in terms of what we make and what we create, but also who we are as people. And a key element of that is our identity. In our strategy, we say culture is the way in which we live our lives. It's the communities, places and spaces we create, the people we spend time with, and ultimately how we respond to life's challenges. We use cultural activity to both celebrate and reaffirm who we are. So in a major city the size of Leeds, how do we work to make sure that culture is just that it's about the people, that it represents the diversity of the city, that it's inclusive, and that all cultures are represented? Like no other time, we need investment in culture. Many councils have invested loads in COVID recovery and left huge deficits. And so we look to national government when new policy emerges that can really support our cultural ambitions locally. And levelling up is one of those such policies and funding opportunities, significant levels of investment that can really make a change and make a difference to us locally. However, levelling up for me suggests, ground up opportunity, voice, mobility and empowerment. And that through a cultural, creative lens in our city could make a huge difference. However, I fear that the bar is set too high for people and for places, particularly those people and places that are furthest from our primary economic centres. So, for me, the phrase new localism actually speaks to the hyperlocal. It speaks to district centres and the myriad of both social and geographic communities everywhere. So how do we ensure, how can we work to make sure and influence new policies such as levelling up to make sure that they can be reached, they can be accessed by, and can help shape and improve the lives of people in our smaller district centres. My final note is really to Leeds 2023. So we are really fortunate that we have Leeds 2023, our year of culture, on the horizon. Leeds 2023 started out as our bid to become a European capital of culture pre-Brexit, and now it will be a region-wide celebration of Leeds as a creative city and reflecting the rich breadth of people and cultures that live and visit here. We want to make sure that Leeds 2023 is representative of everybody and it's owned by everybody. And we're already looking to what the legacy of that might be. Now, one of the challenges that we have with a culture strategy is, we have to measure the success. We have to measure the impacts that we make. And so we're looking at developing a cultural impacts framework that helps to make sure that we're placing people at the centre of the work that we do, of the developments that we're engaged in, and the opportunities that we create through culture. But I guess a question to everybody in this session, what impacts matter most? How do we measure them? And again, how can we make sure that people remain at the centre of the data, the information, the narratives that we gather as we progress through our culture strategy?
That was fantastic. Thank you. That's a real tour de force, and giving people 5 minutes is actually quite cruel when you've got that kind of expertise on the panel. But moving on very fast to leave time for all those questions. Canon Dick from Creative Scotland, could you take the floor for 5 minutes?
Thanks, Eliza. Yes, my name is Canon Dick. I'm the Head of Place Partnerships and Communities at Creative Scotland, the national agency for the arts, screen and creative industries in Scotland. I'm a fairly pale Scottish woman with long pink hair, glasses, and a necklace that shows the Waverley paddle steamer, because I do have a thing for statement jewellery. So I'm going to talk today a bit about Scotland and Creative Scotland's approach as the national agency working in local areas, and how we work together with national, local governments and with local agencies and organisations in order to better support communities. Creative Scotland's had a number of place-based programmes. We previously had a programme called the Creative Place Awards, which celebrated local communities who were doing something excellent around creativity or culture in their place, working together, and gave them some funding in order to continue to deliver those activities. We have an ongoing strategic programme called the Place Partnership Programme, which works in partnership with local authorities, cultural trusts, enterprise companies, arts organisations, universities, anyone who wants to sit round with us round a table and talk about how culture, creativity, creative industries can be better supported in their area, or how we can better either address challenges or take up opportunities, working together to address major problems or things that we can kickstart or do something different that would only happen if we work together to do it. However, I'm going to talk mostly today about the Culture Collective programme. In 2020, when lockdown happened, and particularly freelancers who work in the culture and creative sectors, who weren't necessarily supported through any other programmes, through government support or through furlough, there was a real drive to support those individuals across the UK. In Scotland, we had a report focused from the advisory group on economic recovery, which suggested being able to support freelancers and people working in creative practitioners to work in communities in order to support the communities as well. Through various discussions, through involvement of the Scottish Government, of the National Partnership for Culture in Scotland, taking into account Scotland's National Culture Strategy, Creative Scotland strategies, our previous work with Place Partnerships, Creative Place Awards, and also other substantial work around place-based activity with culture, for example, the civic role of the arts that Cullis Gulbenkian had delivered, and our ambitions to develop a communities-focused creative programme, Culture Collective was developed. Culture Collective is a Scottish Government funded programme which is funded through emergency COVID funding, and the main focus of this programme is to support creative freelancers working in communities. We were very light touch in our guidance. The main criteria of this programme is that 50% of the funding has to go to creative practitioners' fees. Contracts must be at least 6 months long, and they must also embody fair work, not just fair pay. It has to be about terms and conditions that support creative freelancers. Primarily as well, we didn't want to hear about what people were going to deliver in communities. We wanted to understand the process that organisations and artists, creative practitioners would work with communities in order for the communities to shape their future cultural voice or their future cultural life in their place. Now, we awarded 26 organisations and consortia funding for 18 months to deliver these programmes. Some of them haven't started yet, some of them are just starting, some of them are way off and they've got artists, coordinators and creative practitioners working in communities to do something different, to be flexible, to find out what communities want themselves rather than trying to fulfil the outcome of a funding programme which needs to know what you're going to deliver, where, when and how. Our priority was, can you engage with the community? Can you be there to support artists, to ensure that things aren't parachuted in? Can you provide opportunities for people to earn work and work in a way that they might not have been able to before? But essentially, can you give communities this way of doing something which they might not have had before either? So there are projects and consortia and organisations from around Scotland, from Shetland down to the Scottish borders, and in urban centres, in small neighbourhoods, but also people working at region-wide, Highland-wide programmes of work, quite often being artists in residence programme. We will have an ongoing evaluation process for this, trying to articulate the models that work for communities, large, small, urban, rural, peri-urban, remote, island, taking into account language differences and the needs of artists alongside the needs of communities. We're at the early stages of this. We're really excited about it. We've had, alongside the actual delivery of the programme, there is a network which is led by a programme lead who is coordinating, supporting, providing training opportunities. There's peer support, peer exchange, and we've just got an events programme that's just started this month in order to start opening up that very internal discussion about how we can best support people to deliver these programmes in a fairly difficult circumstance at the moment, but then how we can take this work and showcase it and highlight it to other people, tie it in with other research opportunities, and really start to think bravely, differently, and long term about how culture can change communities, but being led by the communities themselves.
Thank you so much, Karen. That's brilliant. And I love this kind of need that this panel has to go between, huge questions of how to involve communities, but also actually practically how you do it every day and where those two things meet in the middle. Without even pausing for breath, or I guess I will technically take a breath, can I pass over to Lindsay for her 5 minutes on the floor? Thanks.
Thanks, Eliza. Hi, everyone. I'm Lindsay Taylor. I'm curator of the University of Salford Art Collection. I'm a white female with long curly hair, and I'm wearing glasses and a black top today. As curator, I've developed a series of strategic partnerships across the city of Salford and beyond over the last 8 years. And I'm going to talk briefly about a couple of them in relation to the pandemic, really aiming to sort of outline the importance of the ecology in a place. And I think there's a lot of synergy with what Pam was talking about. It's all around people. Firstly, Salford Culture and Place Partnership. In 2017, the University, Salford City Council and Arts Council in England signed a memorandum of understanding facilitated by the Lowry. All 4 of these partners became anchor organisations in what became Salford Culture and Place Partnership, which now includes the BBC, RHS Gardens Bridgewater, Peel Media, Salford Community Leisure, Salford CDS, and to represent the creative sectors, the directors of Walk the Plank and Islington Mill. On the 12th of March 2020, the partnership launched our new strategy for culture, creativity and place in Salford. The strategy focuses on 5 areas, with importantly people being the central pillar. A week later, the first lockdown was announced, and on the same day, the partnership heard that we were successful with Arts Council funding for a citywide project aptly called Rediscovering Salford. The main partners of this partnership were the University, the City Council, Salford Museum and Art Gallery, the RHS Gardens Bridgewater and the Lowry. And the project included a series of strategic commissions for artists based in Salford. Obviously, the project was postponed and reshaped as we navigated the various lockdowns. However, it also gave us more time to develop the project, ensuring the process of selecting and commissioning the artists became more meaningful. So following a series of online studio visits with artists from Islington Mill and Paradise Works, we invited 4 artists, Hilary Jack, Jack Brown, Cheddar Gorgeous and Lizzie King, to make new work. The Rediscovering Salford partnership allowed the city's institutions to support and engage with our local artistic community at a time when many visual artists were losing work. I think we all felt a collective responsibility to protect the artistic community in Salford. In addition, the university collection, we also repurposed some funds to launch a series of digital COVID commissions and micro commissions, and we reached out to artists and provided virtual support sessions to those applying for Arts Council emergency funding. Of course, I would say Salford has always created place and proudly independent, and it takes time to develop meaningful partnerships and mutual trust. As a university, I think we understand the importance of being connected to and being part of the artistic communities in Salford. I mean, it's clearly vital if we're going to attract and retain students and graduates. But this is a long-term and ongoing endeavour. One of the ways in which we've been doing this is through a graduate scholarship scheme, which I established 8 years ago. This is in partnership with Castlefield Gallery and local studios, Paradise Works, Islington Mill and Hotbed Press. I think we're all equally keen to support emerging talent, and each year we support a small number of graduates with studio space and a programme of professional development and CPD. The university continued to fund this programme throughout the pandemic, adapting it as necessary. But the fact this programme existed and was already embedded in the studios meant that there were already strong foundations and trust between the university and the artist studios in the city. A significant legacy of COVID in Salford is a network called Visual Arts Salford. And this really started off as an email from one of the directors of Islington Mill in the first lockdown. Basically, do you think we should all meet and have a chat? And so representatives from 3 main studio groups, the Arts Council, Castlefield Gallery and the university, we all met up online just really to check in with each other. And it sounds like such a simple idea, but pre-pandemic, everyone was so busy, it seemed virtually impossible to get everyone around a table. But now, having met virtually every 6 weeks or so, last 18 months, the group is gently expanding. The university takes responsibility for convening the meetings. However, the group remains proudly unconstituted and informal. It's become a really useful and valuable forum to catch up, to know what each other is working on, to share invites, and to avoid things like clashes of funding bids. There's loads more I could say, but to summarise, as a curator, I truly believe in investing in the artists in our city at all stages of their careers. I also believe it's important to be outward facing, and we have continued our national and international work throughout the pandemic. For example, the peer-to-peer UK-Hong Kong Digital Festival, which provided opportunities for several artists from Salford. I think the success of the Rediscovering bid meant that the institutional partners had cash we could immediately use to benefit the artistic community during the pandemic. But it's not just about cash. I think it's about people, and the shared experience of the global pandemic really helped us all to care more for each other as individuals. If anything, that shared experience strengthened the existing relationships. I think everyone better understood that whether large or small, we're all equally part of a delicate ecology that needs nurturing to remain healthy. And in the end, any strong relationship or partnership or network, or for that matter, cultural strategy, really relies on trust between people. And I think I'll leave it there. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Lindsay. That was brilliant and very to time, so I'm very impressed. Can I bring in Ben next from University of Leeds?
Of course. Lovely to be in front of you all today. So I'm a white man in his mid-30s, short brown hair and a beard, and today I'm wearing a shirt in an effort to look somewhat professional. Along with Abby Gilmore, we're contributing to the CCV project that Ben introduced at the beginning of the session today, looking into the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. And we're both going to contribute some commentary around the work that we've been doing in Greater Manchester. So I'll introduce kind of the framing for the research, and then Abby's going to go on to look in some more detail at the questions that it raises or some of the tensions that we've been exploring. So to frame the research, we've been taking an ecosystems approach, focusing on the 10 district authorities of the Greater Manchester City region and the devolved governance of the Greater Manchester Combined Authority. Using a mixture of interviews, action research, and case studies, our focus has been on the response to COVID-19 within city, regional, and local authority policy structures. This is a deliberately place-based approach, looking at how responses to the pandemic have been shaped by existing political interests and the specific characteristics of the local cultural ecosystem. Greater Manchester is in some ways an exceptional case because of high levels of buy-in from local political leadership who have long seen culture as a key contributor to development in the region. Strong partnerships between the cultural sector and local government supported access to emergency funds such as CRF. And while there are some concerns around the distribution of these funds, with the majority going to regularly funded organisations, the proactive response from local and combined authorities resulted in the region receiving close to 60% of the total amount awarded across the entire Northwest, with some organisations accessing public funds for the first time. Interviews at key points in the pandemic has given us insight into which interventions have had the most impact for different stakeholders in different places, and across the interviews is a strong sense of collective responsibility for the sector, particularly as a first stage response to the impacts of the pandemic. Larger institutions such as MIF acknowledge their responsibilities to freelance workers by providing drop-in sessions, advice, and micro-commissions, while the GM Artist Hub was established in the weeks after the first national lockdown and brought together 13 flagship organisations to coordinate support for independent artists. As a whole, the region saw a series of collaborative initiatives that connected local authorities, cultural organisations, and other sectors in response to the localised effects of the pandemic. We've already heard from Lindsay about some of the work that was going on in Salford in this area as well. United We Stream was a crowdfunding programme of live stream events that was led by the GMCA, and it's a particularly clear example of this type of initiative. We've put together a booth on the project that you can go and have a look at if you want some more information about that. Broadly, though, the region's established cultural infrastructure supported the agility and resilience of the sector in the face of the pandemic. And we can see in these examples an ecosystems response that activates the place-based expertise of local authorities and cultural organisations to help mitigate some of the effects and impacts of the pandemic at a local level. And I'll hand over to Abby.
Thanks very much, Ben. Yeah, I'm a tired-looking white woman who's got a fringe and a big blue scarf around her neck because she wishes she had the central heating on. It's great to be here, and thanks, Ben, for setting up the research framing that we've been doing. And we've already heard about from our other panelists about kind of the importance of networks and collaboration and taking an ecosystems approach. So what are the implications of the research, and how do we learn from Greater Manchester as an exceptional case? GM is a place where there's, political buy-in, and there have been these really strong sector level partnerships, and they've clearly been significant factors in the region's ability to attract emergency funding, particularly cultural recovery funding. But actually, the analysis that we've been doing also with other members of the project team on cultural recovery funds shows that it's actually primarily building-based organisations already established with a particular pull towards the city centre within the city region, which I guess is in some ways no surprise. The broader analysis of cultural recovery funds has shown that the kinds of place types that benefit are the ones that basically are ones that already have cultural infrastructure, but also the capacity to bid for funds, and also very often strongly buoyant local authorities and partnerships with their cultural sector. So one of the questions that we need to ask is what are the kind of benefits of those existing organisations and networks of organisations that receive emergency funding and that are getting the support? Are those trickling out to other organisations, including freelancers and smaller organisations through those networks? Another question to raise is around, of course, freelancers. We've heard a lot already today at the conference about the precarious situation, and Greater Manchester has taken a number of different approaches led by the different local authorities within the city region to support freelancers, but of course it's still precarious, and with the absence of national policy interventions, freelancers in the creative and cultural sector and allied to events industries and the nighttime economy, it's still going to be very much entirely based on market adjustments rather than any sort of national support. Recovery plans for the region have been prioritising ways to try to stabilise the freelance ecology, but we really don't understand yet what the longer term implications are for that. Similarly, and with the broader project team led by Dave O'Brien, we've been looking at the labour force survey data at a Greater Manchester level, and we can see that in terms of the cultural sector occupations and jobs, they're very much mirroring the national picture in Greater Manchester. There was a significant impact on the pandemic on workforce numbers in the creative industry sector, particularly for music, performing arts and visual arts, and working hours plummeted, effectively wiping out a growth in the Greater Manchester City region's workforce numbers, which had doubled in Greater Manchester since 2017, but within the first couple of quarters of 2020, it had gone. And there's some suggestions of upticks and kind of expansions in various areas. If you look into the broader creative economy in terms of publishing and media and TV and film production, which of course the city region has clusters within, there is suggestions that those sectors have expanded during the pandemic, but for performing arts and the mainly supported funded culture, then the picture's far less clear. And as we will hear from those who've been working on that in terms of the national picture, the workforce numbers in Greater Manchester and their recovery across the greater creative economy overall, the way that COVID has impacted on those has been very much stratified in different ways by ethnicity and gender, and has actually exacerbated inequalities. There is an underlying demand for improved pay and security and working conditions for the cultural sector. So what do all of these, along with all of the other kind of issues that we've heard from our interviews around sector burnout and continued uncertainty about business, viable business models for endemic COVID times, what are the implications for these? One of the things I wanted to raise that we're reflecting on currently is whether there is the chance that we are moving away in Greater Manchester from, or we're potentially moving away from this kind of place-based approach to a more individualised and individuated approach as a capacity and the strategic interests of local authorities and the energy of organisations to collaborate dwindles. Also, we do need to bear in mind that we are reliant on, and those organisations are reliant on, consumer choice on the part of audiences, and as we've already heard from the Impacts of Audience session, there's a nervousness to return to business. The Panto season is going to be really key, and it will be a key test to see what actually happens. So I also wanted to point out that there is a challenge. These different challenges challenge traditional approaches to audience development, and we know from previous research that communities who are not already part of a narrow audience demographic that support the funded arts ecology remain the majority in the urban conurbation. So audience development is only based on a deficit model of cultural participation where you're trying to bring somebody in. It's not going to change a lack of interest or engagement, let alone tackle public health concerns. So one of the things, and in fact, actually, interestingly, thinking about how organisations within GM are kind of shifting their understanding of how they might need to change their strategies towards audience development. They're moving away from KPIs which involve ticket sales to more sentiment analysis and thinking about social impact and measuring their success in this way. So finally, just to conclude, what might this mean for understanding how we support place-based approaches and don't move back to a kind of more individuated approach? How do we support cultural ecosystems more clearly? I think how we do learn from Greater Manchester is about how I was at an event actually listening to Richard Leese, the soon-to-be ex-leader of Manchester City Council, this week, and he talked about local government as being a key convener and a custodian of place. And I think that idea of local government and other stakeholders being the public servants of place through the networks and through the ways that they collaborate across cultural ecosystems is absolutely key, whether that's the anchor institutions we've already heard about from Lindsay and others. These are the ways that we are going to continue to support place-based working. So in Greater Manchester, we've had the opportunity for strengthening the environment for better collaboration through devolution and through, devolution of power into supporting those local authorities and their partnerships into convening and stewardship organisations. And this is what I think we need to learn from in terms of supporting local cultural strategies. And I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Abby. That was fantastic. And I'm going to swing straight into questions, but just as a reminder, pop your questions in the Q&A, upvote the questions you want to hear, because we've only got 24 minutes, so I'm going to try and rattle through them. I'm going to selfishly actually echo a question which I've just upvoted, which is from Thorsten. And Thorsten asks, Pam, how would you describe the extent to which culture and its impact on wider outcomes for people and places, using the definition that you're using, is genuinely embedded and understood in the wider council and local strategic partnerships? So Pam, I wondered if you could reflect on that for a minute. It's a really interesting question.
Gosh, that's a biggie. We're on a journey, I think, actually, as a council, and the thing that I think is providing greatest opportunity to understand the extent to which culture is really embedded cross council is actually Leeds 2023, and it's because it provides us with a strong lead in. It takes 5 years, 5 years in its development, but also making it work. It requires everybody's input and engagement, not just the culture services, but transport and planning and communities and children's services. It actually requires a whole council, I think, to make it work. I think there's certainly a lot of stake in making it happen. I guess the legacy, the journey through 2023 and the legacy, following the year, will give us prime opportunity to actually test the extent to which culture is understood, not just actually through the lens of culture services, but actually through the lens of the different the different services across council. So I'll come back to you, Thorsten, on that one.
That's great. And I'm going to swing back actually to a question for the whole panel, which is from Nina from the Paul Hamlin Foundation. How far do panellists feel that Arts Council England's announcement of priority places might impact local and regional approaches to culture? And I might go to, if she doesn't mind, Lindsay first, for any thoughts on that, just to be mean.
Oh, I feel put on the spot there. I don't know is my honest answer. I just don't know. I think obviously it has potential to have massive impact, but also I think that things will just happen at the grassroots level. I think that the partnerships, the relationships, networks we've developed will continue, whether there's funding there or not. I don't know if that really answers the question.
I like the idea that's been raised a couple of times of actually levelling up being about things rising from the bottom rather than kind of top-down action. And obviously there have to be bits of those. Do any other panelists have a kind of response to that question? Pam, yeah.
It's so timely. I was having this conversation this morning with colleagues. I think I understand the approach. I've 16 years in the Arts Council, so I absolutely understand the policy approach to that. My concern, though, is always going to be that Leeds, with its population size and 33 wards, will never be designated a priority place. And so what impact does this have actually to those hyper-local communities? levels of poverty and disadvantage are no less great than towns and cities that would be designated a priority place. So I worry about people and communities falling through the cracks.
Yeah, lots of people coming on that. Karen.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I won't talk about England, but in a Scotland context, we don't have priority places, but we do have places where we know our investment or our or the infrastructure might not be as developed or as strong as we would want it to be. We also know that investment from across all lottery funders, not just Creative Scotland or people focused on creativity, but from the National Lottery Heritage Fund or the National Lottery Community Fund, might also be not as well accessed from certain parts of the areas of Scotland as it could be, and that we are fairly sure is down to a lack of capacity at local level and a lack of specialist support and people to actually bring things together and quite often do the applications. But from a Scottish level, a bit like Pam, there are parts of our larger cities where, you would not necessarily mark Edinburgh as a priority place due to the festivals and due to the level of cultural infrastructure, but there are neighbourhoods in Edinburgh where they are definitely priorities for support. And the same when you look at a really rural or out with an urban, particularly, the bigger cities of Scotland, it would be hard to designate an entire local authority area or even down to a parish or community level as a priority, because actually low levels of investment can make a massive change, and one application from one certain area would make a massive difference to the delivery of cultural projects or infrastructure in that area. So I think we're lucky enough in Scotland to have a small enough country that we can make that context debate and discussion without necessarily designating things, but there are areas that we try to work in more through our Place Partnership programme, because we want to work together to develop the cultural infrastructure in that area and support people to access funding.
Great. Yes, Abby, do you want to quickly come in?
Yeah, I think I'd just like to come in here because I think the problem with the idea of priority places is you then have to work out how you're going to prioritise them. And as we've seen with the Towns Fund and now with the Levelling Up Fund, there is also debate about, what are the criteria, the eligibility criteria that overcome political interest in resources going to particular places. And this is a huge debate for us in terms of thinking about, actually understanding what a truly equitable way of supporting culture. Culture happens in place. Culture policy. I'm going to plug this because I'm currently involved with a number of others in creating an edited volume, which is about culture policies local. So participation takes place mainly in place, apart from when it's digital, obviously. So that's and the fundamental misunderstanding of place-based working is the fear that if you talk about place-based, then you're only going to talk about how you might then prioritize particular places. Place-based working is about supporting the partnerships, the networks, the way that ecologies work together, and strengthening the capacity for local ownership, buy-in, and support. And so that's, so I think in terms of one of the things I was going to finish by saying, but I've run out of time, obviously, was, the pandemic has given the Arts Council and Let's Create a really strong opportunity to work closely with local places. And, Arts Council is very good at working in places, Arts Council England. I arguably Creative Scotland has a different approach, and I would argue in some ways that might be more equitable. So, but it's a really strong opportunity to bring together those partnerships and think about how we can actually shift the distribution, allocation of resources to strengthen places. And I know that there's a bit of a fear from arts organisations that means that the focus is going to be taken off the art somehow and put on the place, and then some places will get it and some places won't because they don't have enough indices of multiple declaration or whatever the criteria are. So I think rather than moving back to the deficit model of these places need our help and our arts policy, and therefore we will prioritise them, we need to keep moving towards the asset-based model, which is, how do we strengthen places so that they can really utilise their own cultural assets, whether that's histories, whether that's the Greater Manchester, kind of what Richard Lee's talked about as attitude, I think, balls. Then whatever that kind of brand identity is for a place and how that's used to support kind of the development of culture and culture-led recovery to place, then I think that's really important.
And I think actually there's a question from Sarah at the University for Creative Arts, which sort of builds on this conversation that we're having, which is about the kind of urban centricity to the conversation so far. And I would echo that. Actually, the PEC has done a lot of research thinking about microclusters, and we've got some more research on the rural creative industries coming out. And that's shown that we find these clusters of creative activity from, unsurprisingly, from the Shetland Islands down in both rural and city spaces. However, as we probably all know, a lot of the kind of GVA is created more likely to be created in cities for a whole load of reasons. And we also know that creative communities, as has been picked up by panelists, thrive on relationships with one another. And so there are benefits to people living close together. I wondered if the panelists could reflect on how some of the strategies that they've been discussing, especially those which are much more based in some of the cities which you all come from, might work or not work for a rural scenario. Would anyone like to come in on that? Karen, do you want to come in?
I think I might flip that around, because some of the most innovative and most interesting and most proactive work in place-based focused activity in Scotland is emerging from rural areas. It is from people like the Stove in Dumfries, whose focus has led to developing and regenerating the high street, looking at bringing people back to living in high streets in towns where there's very few people left living on the high street. There's very few anything open after 5 o'clock at night that isn't a pub, and actually having that long-term investment from an organisation that is focused on what it can do to support its community to change the relationship between the communities and the towns is really important. A lot of that's happening in the smaller towns and places, or smaller neighbourhoods if it's the bigger cities. I think there has to be an understanding that you can't replicate any of the strategies, just taking it from one place to another, because a lot of the times they are based on the individuals, the creative sparks, those people that are pushing development, making the connections. And a lot of the times they're also dependent on a flexible and proactive approach from a local authority, and quite often again that is down to one individual who can see a benefit there and who is willing to develop, adapt and change what they are doing in order to take that opportunity that someone or an organisation or a group of people are bringing together. It's not the only place that's happening, but I firmly believe that a lot of the rural people working in a rural or in a setting that is peri-urban or non-large city can give us the best learning and best opportunities to develop.
I think that's such an interesting point, and something we've thought about in the PEC is if you switch the lens, so going from a lens which is focused on, say, making GVA from the creative industries sector, where would you invest? Well, that might be the case that you would invest in quite a small number of very large cities. But if the lens you're looking at is what will make a kind of thriving communities across the United Kingdom, every single place is going to need different kinds of cultural and creative industries investment. So it's silly to just think about it in terms of that single lens, and that's not what anyone wants, not least, as I remind policymakers, voters. Lindsay, did you want to come in, or shall I go on? There's another question, and
I'm happy for you to go on, because I think Karen expressed it really well and said what I was going to say pretty much.
Great. So we've got a question from Trevor, who's interested to know what the panel feels about places having to participate in competition to access centralised funds. We've had a little bit of a discussion about concerns about centralised funds. Does this exclude places without the cultural infrastructure, as Abby alluded to? That makes sense. And I'd like to add to that. Are there any benefits to having, we've talked quite a lot about the negatives, but does the panel think there are any benefits at all to having projects which funnel a more significant amount of money into a certain number of places over a certain period of time, thinking about City of Culture programmes, for example? Or should we be moving towards a process which, although place specific, is entirely kind of equitable in any given year across places? So who would like to go first? Sorry, I can't see everyone's hands. Does anyone put them up? Great, thanks. Is it too horrible a question, too wicked a problem? Abby, go on.
I was just going to say that is the wicked problem, I think, and I don't know how you would devise some kind of experiment to see how that, in a country that doesn't have a social democratic basis, and I guess I'm again mainly talking about England here, I think it's very difficult for us to even conceive of doing something in that sort of way. And yet that's been at the back of my mind for about 15 years, really, or maybe 10 years at least. I've just put in the chat that there was this moment when cultural planning methodologies nearly happened, or there was some experimentation about the idea of the standard charge back in the 2006 or so under New Labour, before everything waned. There was loads of money. And that was a moment when there was nearly the kind of introduction that had been originated under Jenny Lee, whereby you would actually have a per capita expectation that places of certain sizes would have, a culture house, an orchestra, and that would be funded and that would be supported. And so that was a really kind of thinking about how do you build cultural infrastructure? How do you avoid the Milton Keynes effect, which had to, Milton Keynes does have culture. I'm not going to deny that. If you read Ruth Finnegan's book, The Hidden Musicians, from way back, people made their own culture there. But, so I think that asking that wicked question, thank you, Eliza, is a really important one. And I think we should play with it. We should look at it. But I can't see how it's going to happen under this government. So.
Yeah, Pam. And then I've got one final question, and then I'm going to whip round with some final thoughts.
Okay, so I'm being weird because I put my hand up to actually say that I don't quite know how to answer that question. But it's actually a really, really good one. I mean, some good and interesting things come from, I guess cities or towns being focused on the prize. But actually, if I use Leeds 2023 as an example, the year is going to be amazing. But I actually think that greatest learning, takes place in the journey there. So if that's the prize, if the journey toward a pinnacle where of cultural celebration is the prize, how do we support cities to kind of really take that journey? I don't know how you'd bottle that or shape that or how you'd invest in that, but I would absolutely, if I want to share anything about our Year of Culture so far, it is just the learning that we're gaining from it, not just about culture, but about people.
That's great. So a final question, which is actually the first question, and it's for you, Lindsay. So this is from Jackie, who's interested in what happens to governance when there are multi-sector and multiple partnerships that work in civic spaces, places and ecosystems, and the kind of government structures they need to support those complex projects. So if you could reflect on that quickly.
Again,
an easy one to finish off.
It's a really complicated question with sort of multifaceted, and I think there's no sort of one straightforward answer. I mean, in relation to Salford Culture and Place Partnership is currently sort of reviewing its governance, and there's a task and finish group set aside to decide on how it goes forward, because that's really, really important. So that is happening, but I'm not part of that group, so I don't quite know where it's up to at the moment. In terms of the smaller organisations, I talked about Visual Arts Salford, we deliberately don't have any governance. We've talked about it. We've talked about constituting ourselves and decided that's not how we want to do it. We want to remain informal. We're not applying for funding or anything. It is just about being a network and supporting each other. And I think, the space is for both. You obviously need that sort of governance, the high level stuff, but sometimes, you can spend more time trying to work out what it is than actually what you want to do. So I don't really know if I've answered that question very well, but the answer is that's the best I can give at the moment in terms of Salford, I guess. It's hard.
That's great. That's great, Lindsay. And everyone, actually, the panel's answers have been fantastic. Some really good, knotty questions. I wanted to finish, actually, by whipping around everyone with one more kind of slightly wicked question and hearing some perspectives on it. I was wondering, so if the panel had a time machine and could go back pre-pandemic and was giving a speech to, I don't know, city mayors, some regional policymakers, maybe the LGA, you could say one thing to either do during the pandemic or not do. Do you have a sense of what your kind of recommendation might be? If you could go back and kind of pull out one thing. We've discussed, whether things are top down, bottom up, kind of place specificity, but is there anything you think that's been a huge learning from this pandemic that you would share? And because I'm going to go to Abby first. So Abby.
That's not mean. I was going to ask, because there are people who can represent this or who might be able to answer whether this is a bonkers thing to suggest, but from my perspective and from hearing from so many different voices in Greater Manchester that are working with and in local authorities, I would say go to your local authority, beef up their culture team, get them, invest in those people who are the interlocutors, the intermediaries that work between different directorates, different departments, and that work with the cultural sector, and they will help to then be the gatekeepers I've just seen in the chat around funding. They will help to support and the administration of managing the crisis, but with a really strong idea about being a custodian and a convener of place in mind, because that's what their jobs are. So I would say,
yeah, I like it. Okay, quick fire, Pam, I'm coming to you.
Oh, that is mean. Gosh, I've got half a thought, and it's something about a question that I've got in my head around, what is cultural infrastructure? So over, a year, and I'm exaggerating here, over a year, 2 years, people didn't move. And yet we still had a cultural sector with offering and provision and the like. Now, a lot of that moved to online. Some incredible organizations turned their centers into places where people could get food. Others actually created bags of hope and creativity and took them to people's doorsteps so they could actually access culture. I think I would access culture and creativity. I think my half thought is I'd like to present a challenge that cultural infrastructure as we know it is going up in the air, and if it landed whereby it didn't rely on people to move and to access and cross thresholds, what does the cultural infrastructure now need to be?
I love that. So Lindsay, you've come off mute. Quick.
There's lots to think about there for the last two, and I think looking at that cultural infrastructure is clearly really important. But I suppose for me it'd be make sure you value the artistic communities, and I say that because I think Salford does, but I think that's what I'd reiterate: it, value your artists.
Love that. Karen?
Lindsay's stolen mine this time. Yes, trust and value your artists, your producers, the creative community, and know that everything doesn't have to happen in the one big place. Things happening in smaller places and in different places are equally as valuable, especially when you can't travel anywhere, and also when transport and infrastructure is also under threat, particularly in rural areas.
And Ben, I'm giving you the last word on this one.
What a privilege. Actually, I think for me, the point, I mean, obviously, Abby and I are commenting on the same context, so I think it relates back to what she's saying, but it also goes back to what you were saying at the beginning, Eliza, in the sense that the conversation is about finding ways to mobilize these big theoretical ideas in practice. And I think that's really reflected in the speakers that we have here, that they're engaging, they're grappling with big ideas, but really they become effective, or they become influential in the moment that there's an intersection between theory, policy, and the cultural sector itself. One of the reflections that came from our interviews was about the responses of policy officers really acting or going beyond or going ahead of policy discussion and formal policy processes. And it really feels like embedding that responsivity in relationship with the cultural sector and giving that legitimacy as part of a governance framework. Well, if I have my time machine, that would be the reflection I'd offer.
That's fantastic. Well, I would like to go back and give this whole panel to that group of people so they can listen to all of your thoughts. But thank you so much to everyone. Thank you to the audience who's here sort of quite late in the evening and hanging on, but I know you will have found it a really valuable session. So thanks to everyone, and goodbye.